Not played Inside yet? If the answer is indeed no, I'm going to ask you politely to stop watching. I'm not going to spoil any major plot elements, but the more I talk about this game and its many wonderful little intricacies, the more you're going to lose on that first blind playthrough. It's been, 6 years since Playdead's Limbo helped bolster the prolific rise of the indie scene on the 360. It's adored by many and at the very least liked by all for its unique visual aesthetic, cryptic narrative and intuitively unique puzzle design. 6 years. 6 whole years Playdead have been working on Inside. So I guess the question you have to ask right off the bat is, does that show? Much of Inside's design is transposed directly from its spiritual predecessor. Limbo's general aesthetic is of course timeless in nearly every respect, but Playdead have managed to somewhat modernise its look with the Unity engine here in Inside. Whilst the monochromatic colour palette of Limbo remains, there's something insanely realised about Inside's art direction, and I mean that quite literally. It's the little things that sell it to you. The shafts of light peeking through gaps between buildings, the general animation quality, and the endlessly inspired backgrounds framing the player character. It all contributes to this nearly unparalleled sense of atmosphere Inside gives rise to almost immediately. But where Limbo felt more inspired by odd folklore, Inside is a touch more relatable in its setting, opting for a weird 1984-like dystopian future. Perhaps what enthralled me most about Inside, however, was its general sound design, not least down to the fact that the composer, Martin Stieg Andersen, recorded much of the score and ambient sound effects through a human skull, feeling that the resulting effect was more befitting of the game's general aesthetic. To say there's music is perhaps a bit of a stretch in my opinion. For the sake of argument, let's call it rhythmic ambience. This rhythmic ambience is there throughout many of the game's pivotal moments, but more importantly, the game knows when to utilise silence, a feat even more impressive than constructing a memorable soundtrack in modern game design. But perhaps the most ingenious thing about Andersen's score is the fact that on occasion, it's used almost as an actual game mechanic. It's wonderfully endearing and thankfully is never overused. This leads me neatly into talking about the game's general mechanics. Much like Limbo, the controls are basic. It's principally a 2.5D side-scroller after all. Left, right, jump and action buttons. What's more important is how said controls are utilised in puzzle solving. This is probably the only area the game falls short for me, and seeing as puzzle solving is at the heart of the experience, that's a big shortfall. I'll admit right now, I don't really like puzzle games. This is for one simple reason: there's no natural flow to solving a problem. A shooter can afford to have a difficult action set piece in its latter stages because it can rely on the player to have mastered its mechanics. The opposite is true for a puzzle game. In most cases the player will have to stop to think about the problem and assess the variables, even if it's a puzzle that shares similar gameplay elements with one previously encountered in the game. Any stop in playtime breaks immersion for me, and I find myself taking frequent breaks to check my phone and the like. This wouldn't be a problem if the game didn't lean so heavily on its atmospherics, but it does, and consequently I forget I'm in this dark, oppressive environment and instead am forced to focus on solving a largely derivative puzzle. It might seem counter to my initial point then when I say that Inside's puzzles are indeed occasionally derivative, sometimes inspired, but largely dull and repetitive. There are 3 great set-piece moments that feel fresh and interesting, but everything in between leans far too heavily either on threat management sections that drag on for far too long and are massively repetitive, or basic grab the thing to climb the thing puzzles. I found myself becoming less enthralled with solving each puzzle and more interested in what the next 3D backdrop was going to look like. I've not much more to say on the puzzles, to be honest. A point of contention for a lot of people is the game's price to playtime comparison. Aside from thinking that's a largely bollocks argument anyway, I disagree. The game is that little bit too long, if anything. Many of the puzzles could have been cut in an attempt to retain some novelty, but that's just me. This review would count for naught if I didn't give my 2 cents on the big set piece moment right at the end of the game. The truth is, I don't know how to feel about it. Initially I had to stop myself from texting everyone in my contacts list demanding they play it at once, even if it were just for those last 20 minutes. But then I started to break it down. Whilst it's undoubtedly shocking, brilliantly implemented, and definitely meant to be the big sticking point, it doesn't really make sense when contrasted with what we already know about the story. Don't get me wrong, I love ambiguous storytelling and Inside does it better than most, but there are certain parts of the narrative, including its last 20 minutes, that serve more as interesting novel mechanics rather than solid story elements, whatever way you spin it. Despite all this, however, Inside remains an excellent achievement. As with every great video game, it marries all aspects of its design to shape a world that's well worth becoming invested in. Despite my small grievances, and they are small bear in mind, I never felt the urge to walk away from it and was compelled to continue playing more for its exquisite art and sound direction rather than what new puzzles might have been lying in wait. You should go pick it up. Like, now.